Yay. Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to be with you all today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to say yes to you. For those of you who don't know me, I am your host today. My name is Nicole Mixdorf, and I am the founder of Balance by Nature, which is an award-winning corporate wellness company that also specializes in personal healing and transformation. And today, I am so honored to welcome Sir Glen Wagstaff to the show. He is an attorney and international business consultant with experience in business, estate, and tax planning for some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the United States. He has handled planning and consulting matters in almost every continent and has advised leaders of nations, billionaires, and large multinational corporations. Glen is the managing partner of Intervivos PLLC, the largest estate planning law firm in the United States, which has been recognized with over 50 international awards for being the best estate planning firm in the US. In 2022, Glen was knighted by the Royal House of Cappadocia in the Royal Order of Constantine the Great and St. Helen. Like, how amazing is that? And since then, he has also served as an executive producer for an independent television channel. He's become a certified partner for Unblinded in their executive coaching program. He's co-founded a bank and assisted in developing a crypto asset exchange company under the regulatory authority of El Salvador and a proprietary smart contract system on its own unique blockchain technology. I mean, how incredible is this? Glen regularly sits on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, as well as his own foundation, and he serves as the chief legal counsel for multiple companies. In his career, Glen has been recognized 10 times as one of the top estate planning attorneys in the country. He's received over a dozen Best Managing Attorney awards and multiple Outstanding Leadership awards and Outstanding Advisor awards. I mean, how incredible is this? As a serial entrepreneur, a public speaker, an international consultant, an author, and philanthropist, Glen's experience allows him to relate to business owners on a profound level, whether they're starting a business or have already established their own enterprises. Well, I am just so happy to have you here with us today. Thank you, Glen, for joining us today. Hey, thank you for being here.
Excited to be here. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thank you so much. I just, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you over the last several years and just watching your career blossom, and just the way that you help people is just so beautiful. So thank you so much, Glen.
Thank you. That was an amazing introduction, by the way. Thank you.
Oh, I can't take any of the credit. Like, I'm reading through this and I'm like, wow, Glen, you're just amazing. So thank you for joining us today. Just to kind of dive in, I'd love to, talk a little bit about your amazing background that you have. It's so incredibly diverse, from financial services to founding the nation's largest estate planning firm. So maybe can you share with our audience today, what is it that initially drew you to estate planning, and how has your career evolved to include such global expertise?
Yeah. So, I grew up in Southern California, and out of high school, I started working with a law firm as an intern. And I had the opportunity as an undergrad to kind of get involved a little bit with estate planning. I was working for a real estate foreclosure litigation firm.
Oh, okay.
And so every once in a while, as a, just secretary clerk person that was helping out, they would have me work on people's estate plans, and just, it was mostly a template form. I put in their name and their address, and, everybody would get the same thing. And I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. And a few years later, when I was in law school, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, because um, many people don't know this, but as a first year law student, they don't really want you distracted. And so they have a rule that you can't work, even if it's in the field, you can't work a full-time job.
Oh, wow.
And so at the time, I had gotten licensed as a life insurance agent, and there was no rule against running your own business. And
Oh,
so,
that's weird. That's so interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's how I paid my way through law school. And somebody in the life insurance field basically recommended to me that I get involved with estate planning. I said, I don't think so. That would be like the most boring thing I could think of.
Yeah.
And but I promised him I'd look into it. And so, that summer I interned with a firm that did estate planning. I researched a bunch of them, and the one that seemed like the best fit was a regional firm in Salt Lake City. And so I had the opportunity to get more exposure to it, and I fell in love with it because what I realized was every person's different, every family's different, they have unique needs,
Yeah.
and proper planning should be tailored to those needs.
Right.
I was sitting down with people that I would have never imagined sitting down with and helping them with, not solving problems that were already there, because a lot of times in the law, we're
Yeah.
solving problems that already happen, but I was preventing problems. And so it was something that, I just thought that I could make a career around, and I decided to pursue that instead of being a prosecutor.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I like the idea because it's helping people plan for the future, right? And avoid these issues and, protect themselves and set themselves up for success, really. What would you say are some of the most important things that people should consider when they're putting their estate plans together?
Well, the first thing, and I've been doing this for a lot of years, and so I notice certain trends. One of the trends is that most people don't think that they need it.
Mm,
They
yeah,
disqualify themselves.
sure.
And, it's unfortunate because it doesn't really matter how much or how little we have. The planning is really for the people we care about that are going to be left behind when we're not there. And
Yeah.
uh, and so a lot of times when we disqualify ourselves from doing planning, we're just positioning the family for fights, for
Mm,
extra costs and delays and stress, and
right.
realize what we're doing to them by simply not thinking that it's important. Uh,
Yeah.
so that would be the first thing is, it's important to know, yes, you need to have a plan. Now, what type of plan do you need is going to depend. And it may be very simple, just, some powers of attorney or something like that, but you should have something. And that's the first thing. That's the kind of been my crusade since I started in this field is get
Right.
everybody to realize, yes, I do need a plan, and maybe it's something simple or maybe it's something complex, but I need something.
Well, you know what? You touched on something, and I want you to maybe talk a little bit more about that. What happens if you don't have a plan in place and you were to pass away? And let's say you've got a home, you've got children, I don't know if you have a business or don't have a business, but let's just say you've got some assets, including a house and children. What would happen if you have no plan in place?
Well, so let's look at three scenarios, right? So if you have children and they're minor children,
Hmm.
we've seen this time and time again. Minor children can't own property on their own, and
Oh, interesting.
to reach a certain age before they can actually have control of things.
Okay.
And so we've seen times where parents don't have a plan, and then two things happen, right? Somebody has to be the guardian for the kids. And if you haven't nominated someone to be the guardian, the state says that any interested party can nominate themselves. So
Any interested party? That's
any
a really broad, broad, just, definition there.
and sometimes that's not who you want, but it gets worse because if you have like a special needs child, then the state considers itself an interested party.
Oh my.
So just imagine, the uncertainty of you pass away, your kids need somebody to take care of them.
Yeah.
You haven't said who that should be, so a judge is going to decide that for you, and it might
Wow.
even be immediate. It might take a while. So
And they go in the meantime.
they go in the foster care system.
So even if they have like grandma and grandpa are alive, there's aunts and uncles, there's other people that could take them because you didn't elect someone.
If it's not clear who's going to be responsible, then the court's going to put them in the foster care system until the judge makes a decision.
Wow. Yeah, that alone is like terrifying. So, like parents, if you haven't set this up, like first thing. Okay, yeah. keep going.
So that's, I mean, it's, yeah, it's super scary. And then on the financial side also, we've seen situations where, husband and wife with a couple kids, husband passes away. He was the breadwinner. He, left life insurance and everything for the family, but he
Right.
listed the children as the beneficiaries. And then the wife, the mom, can't receive the funds. She has to go through probate to get access. And even after it's released to the children in her care, she has to go to the court every single time she wants to spend the money and ask permission if she can do it.
What?
And
That's
that's
crazy.
right. That's like the natural parent spouse. Like you would think
Not
this.
even like a divorce situation. Like they were married, and because he elected that the children are the beneficiaries instead of the wife being the beneficiary and they're minors, that is what has to happen.
And what's even scarier is as soon as they turn 18, they get all the money and
All of it.
all of it all at
Just
once.
in one lump sum.
Yep. And,
That's
of
that's
course,
wow.
18-year-olds are very wise and prudent with their money, right?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I had no idea that that's something that happened in that capacity. So, yeah, a lot of things to consider there. So, I guess in that scenario, it would make more sense to elect the spouse first as the beneficiary before the kids.
Or or to have an estate plan, right? To have a trust and to name someone to manage it for you. Um,
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest advantages, is to make sure that, for minor children, things are going to be handled until they're old enough with the instructions that you would want, right? When do you want them to have access? What should it be used for? Maybe you don't want them to just blow it all on, cars and whatever, drugs and booze or whatever, right?
Right.
Provide guidelines that they have to follow.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, for people that don't know a whole lot about this, can you just give us some basic information here? Like, what's the difference between a will and a trust? And do you need both?
Yeah. So, and maybe we'll get into a little bit more of this after, but when you do your estate planning, it's not just about when you pass away. It's also about while you're alive, if you're incapacitated. And so planning needs to be like, a will is what we call a testamentary instrument. And when you pass away, its effects will happen after you pass. And it
Okay.
only happen if you enforce it through a court, because it's a supervised sort of instrument, right? So you have
Yeah.
to take it to probate, and then the court's going to follow what the will says.
Okay.
As opposed to a trust, which is what we call a living document. It starts protecting things immediately, even while you're alive. And when you pass away, it continues protecting things and will basically have its effects happen automatically, even without having to go to court. So the two biggest differences between the will and the trust is the will has to go through the court system through probate, because
I
that's how the judge is going to follow what your wishes were. And the trust doesn't have to, because it's all built in already in the instrument. And the
uh,
second difference is that the trust can protect things while you're still alive, whereas the will is only after you pass away.
I see. So if you have a trust, do you need to still have a will, or is that just built into the trust?
Usually you do, but the type of will that you would have is called a pour over will, and it just puts everything into your trust, just in case something was left out, and make sure that the trust will still function.
Wow, that is so interesting. And so obviously there's going to be a lot of strategies around that. So, given like your incredible journey that you've been on from being knighted, right, to co-founding a bank and all the incredible things that you've done, Glenn, what experiences have you had that have really shaped your approach in helping your clients protect their assets and protect their legacies through setting up these kinds of trusts?
We share a lot of stories in this line of work, right? And sometimes they're good stories, people who were able to avoid problems, and sometimes they're sad stories of people who didn't have things in place, and then it causes big problems. And some of the most impactful experiences that I've had is talking to individuals that tell me their story and just feeling the depth of like what they experienced.
Yeah.
I remember being down in Texas, and there was this lady, an immigrant family, and she told me that her husband, about a year before, had had a massive stroke, and he was in the hospital, and she assumed that she was the wife, she's the mother of their kids, right? She
She's so-
assumed that she was able to make all the decisions that he would
yeah.
need,
Yeah.
and he found himself, having to go through multiple surgeries and recovery and all kinds of stuff for an extended period in the hospital. And 2 days into the hospital stay, the hospital brought her into a waiting room and basically said, "Hey, your husband didn't have a medical power of attorney or a healthcare directive. And so the hospital is going to make all decisions for his care and treatment until you can go get a conservatorship for him."
Wow.
And she,
Like the wife needs that?
she, he needs that because it's not automatic.
Wow.
So she said, "Well, what's that?" And they said, "Well, you need to go talk to an attorney." So she goes and meets with an attorney. They put in the paperwork to the court. 18 months later, the conservatorship was granted.
Oh my goodness.
So for 18 months, and she said that the worst part about it was the feeling that they didn't have any control because there
Yeah.
was a lot of decisions that the family wasn't in agreement with, that the hospital did in taking care of him, that she would not have agreed to, but she felt helpless.
Wow.
And that's, that was one of the most impactful things, not just because of what happened to her and her family, but also because I realized the depth of what we help people with, right? That's what we help avoid by
Yeah.
having simple documents.
Right, exactly. That's amazing. Okay, so you've already brought up a few different things that I would think are really important for, a lot of our audience are corporate professionals, so they're working, they've got different assets. I'm sure that, many of them have families of their own and spouses and et cetera. And so what you're sharing, it's like blowing my mind and opening my eyes to all the different things that we should consider. So what are some of the other components that you would suggest are really important to consider in a estate plan? Obviously, this medical power of attorney sounds like a important piece of that. What are some of the other things that are important for people to consider when putting their estate plan together?
So, a standard estate plan would include multiple documents, and it's less about the documents and more about what it's covering, right?
Okay.
But the first thing that we always talk about, the three components that every plan needs to have, is you need to have a life plan. That
Okay.
means not just for when you pass away, it's also if you're alive and you become incapacitated or disabled, what
Mhm.
happens with your medical decisions? What happens with your financial accounts? If you don't have powers of attorney, even between spouses, it's not automatic that someone can make decisions. And, like, for example, if I'm stuck, and this actually happened to one of my clients during COVID, they got stuck outside the country and they couldn't come back in. And
Oh no.
somebody needed to go to the bank and finalize a transaction for their business.
Okay.
The wife wasn't able to access the bank accounts.
Oh no.
And, luckily he had a power of attorney. We were able to activate it and she was able to go in and use it. But even between spouses, it's not automatic that you can manage everything.
Right.
And then it's even more complicated if you think about, well, it's not my spouse, it's my child who just turned 19, or it's my grandmother, or it's my, parents that are starting to get dementia, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And if you don't have these documents, then everything gets complicated because all paths lead to the court system.
And we know that's really fast.
You're in California, right? And California is one of the worst states. On average, you won't get through any of these proceedings in less than a year and a half.
Oh my goodness. Wow. And talk about a nightmare because whatever the situation was that triggered this happening, whether it's somebody passed away or they became incapacitated, that's already a traumatic experience that someone is going through just in and of itself. And then to complicate things even further, to, have all of these issues where now the money is tied up and you can't access this or whatever the situations are. I mean, it can turn into a really scary situation that could be prevented, and I'm all about preventative, health and all of that. So this is just preventative, financial planning and preventative life planning for these different issues that you hope don't happen, but are going to at some point. I mean, everybody's going to die eventually, right? Like we all, are going to meet that day one day. You don't know when. And, I know some people just find it, difficult to think about it or talk about it or whatever. It's easy to put it off, to not do your estate plan. I totally get that, but it doesn't have to be that hard. Maybe can you walk us through, Glenn, like how long of a process really is it when people want to put a plan together? Is it a really complicated experience, or is it more simple than people think? And what are some of the things that they should maybe consider or start thinking about ahead of time before they even sit down with an attorney, on your team, for example, before they even get to that point?
Yeah. So I think that's one of the big reasons why people don't do it, is because they think that it will be that complicated. The
Mhm.
reality is that for most people, it's not that complicated. And again, you have three or four, specific things that you need to think about for your planning. The first one is, like we talked about, healthcare decisions. Who would you have making those, right? The second would be financial decisions, and who would you put in charge that you could trust, that would be able to manage your assets if something happened to you, right? Third would be, if you have minor children, who would be the guardian for them, who would take care of them and make sure that they're getting the help and support that they need. And then finally, how do you want your assets distributed? And so you may say, well, I just want it to go to the kids, but how? When should they receive it? How old should they be? What
Mm,
used for, right? And those sort of things. Those four things are really the core of your plan, so it's not any more complicated than that.
right.
I remember sitting down with, I had a paralegal that was working with me for a while, and we had a conversation because she said, well, I've been working with you for a while, I was thinking of maybe doing my trust, and I just don't know how important it is. And I said, well, you've been working with me, like how important do you think it is? Well, she says, well, of course I want someone to take care of my daughter if something happened to me, but I think my situation is very simple, so how, why would it matter that much if I have a trust or not? And I walked her through, okay, well, if your daughter got all the money at 18, what do you think would happen? And, what would you want to have happen? And if you're gone, what are the types of things that you would want her to experience, even though you're not there? Right. And all of a sudden she starts breaking down crying. And I was like,
Yeah.
frog. She says, I never realized how much this meant to me until now that I'm really thinking through it. Right. And I think that's how it is for most of us. We don't realize how important it is to us until we really kind of dig into it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's something that's just easy to put off or not think about. But you hope you have something in place when you need to. Now, I know that estate planning, obviously, we've talked about, these really important factors, right? That you just mentioned, these four things to consider: who's going to take care of your health, directives, your finances, who's going to watch over the children, et cetera. But an estate plan is for more than just that. And I know a big part of what you do is really getting into like the tax strategies and how to use your estate plan as a way to, leave like a financial legacy behind, et cetera. Can you share with us some of your strategies about how you can use an estate plan as like a financial vehicle to maximize your wealth?
Yeah. So there's a lot to that. We have 32 specialty areas of planning that we focus on as
32. Okay.
but it's interesting because most of the time people think that, again, that estate planning is just for when you pass away and it's just to make sure that things get to the right people. And we deal with, the two things that people can't avoid: death and taxes. Right.
Right.
So on the tax side, a lot of times people say, well, I already have a CPA. Why would I need to meet with an attorney also? And the reality is that most people don't get proactive tax planning from their tax professional.
Sure. Yeah.
So you show up and you do your taxes once a year, and then they tell you this is what you're going to pay. And you say, well, is there any way I could pay less? Right.
Yeah.
And what their job is to look backwards and say, based on what you did,
Right.
is what we can, minimize your taxes to be. And when you do proactive tax planning, what we're doing is we're looking forward and we're saying next year when you're going to file your taxes, let's rearrange things so that you have more options.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of entity formation work. We do
Okay.
a lot of like income shifting by, having the money flow to different entities and different structures. Sometimes that involves charitable planning. Sometimes
Okay.
it involves more complex trusts, right? So you can have a regular revocable living trust, or you can have an irrevocable trust that will help sometimes for asset protection or for avoiding income taxes or estate taxes, or for for other purposes like qualifying for Medicaid or other benefits like that. So there are more complicated structures, and depending on your specific needs, we might use those structures to be able to help grow your assets, grow your wealth, avoid problems, and avoid taxes.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it really does, it goes beyond just we're setting up your plan and we're done. So you have this opportunity to be more strategic with your clients, and kind of look at that, maybe on an annual basis. Is that what you typically suggest people to do?
We include with our custom plans, a review once a year. For most clients, reviewing your estate plan every 3 years, 2 to 3 years, is probably good. And the
Okay.
reason is because when you have major life changes, like you sell a house, or you have another baby, or you retire, or major life changes, then you need to review your plan, because your plan is a living document. Just like your life is changing, your plan should adjust to make sure it's protecting everything.
That makes sense.
And it's also interesting because when we look at this type of planning, in general, especially the more complex stuff, sometimes people say, well, why would I ever pay that much money to have a complex plan in place? And I remember sitting down with a client who said, if it's any more than $2,000, then I'm not going to do it. Right? We
Yeah.
ended up quoting him $60,000.
What?
Yeah, 60,000. And he had a very large estate, multi-million dollar estate. He was going to be exposed to a lot of estate taxes and stuff. And he ended up moving forward. And the reason was because we were saving him $120,000 a year in taxes.
Whoa.
We saved him $12 million in future estate taxes. We put him in a position where his assets were going to be better protected. And we grew the overall value of his net worth of his estate by $10 million.
How do you grow the net worth of someone's estate through estate planning?
It's all leverage, right? So sometimes it's using life insurance. Sometimes it's by avoiding taxes. Sometimes it's by, growing the value of the assets that you already have. And at the end of the day, the biggest drains on our assets when you pass away are three things. Number one, taxes.
Yeah.
Number two, long-term care costs, because the average American's going to need long-term care at some point, and it gets very expensive, right?
Yeah.
And then number three, the family fights and problems, and the things that will drain the estate because of the attorney's fees and because of things going to the wrong places.
Right. Yeah, and that's such a big piece of it. I mean, in my own family, I don't mind sharing, we've had a few different situations where a family member has passed away and it's caused problems like within the family. And it's so sad when things like that happen, And so I'm wondering, I'm sure, Glenn, you've heard crazy stories about families breaking apart and all kinds of messes that happen in the wake of someone's passing, or with inheritance, or inheritance that should have happened that didn't happen, or whatever. How can people avoid, family disputes as they go through this process? What are some of like your best, kind of tried and true sort of strategies that really help to mitigate some of those familial kind of issues that tend to pop up?
I think there's a few things. So half the time, the problems come because we ask for them.
Because we asked for them.
Because we ask, right?
Yeah.
We know our family, we know what they're like, and what.
Mhm.
But we had a situation with a lady who put, they had 4 kids. One of the kids had never talked to the siblings for like 12 years. Like she was alienated from the rest of the family, right? And mom put all 4 kids to be co-trustees together, to have to make every decision together. What
Ah,
are the chances that that's going to work?
right.
Zero. So half the time, it's just a matter of thinking through your specific needs and making sure that you're planning accordingly, right?
Yeah.
The other half the time is, most of the time we assume that the fights come because of the money. And
Right.
actually, statistically, most of the fights are not about the money. Most
They're
of
not.
No, most of the fights are about the emotions around, and a lot of times it's around sentimental items.
Okay,
Uh,
that makes.
right? So sometimes it's because there's not clear communication and you haven't expressed a correct, clear path or plan for the family of what they should do. But sometimes it's because um, we had a situation. There was two ladies and their sisters, and they were raised by their grandmother. And when grandma passed away, they were fighting over a hairbrush. This was a hairbrush,
Like legit a hairbrush.
yeah, and it wasn't a special hairbrush either. It was just like a little wooden like hairbrush, but it was the hairbrush that grandma used to brush their hair every night before she put them to bed. And now they're adults and they're fighting over this hairbrush, and they each spent over $50,000 fighting over this hairbrush.
Are you serious? Oh my God. Yeah.
So, a lot of times it's around the emotions.
Yeah.
We're dealing with the stress and everything else, and people are at their worst at those moments, right? Because they revert back to what they were when they were kids. And
Yeah.
you look around and you're like, well, my kids don't get along that well. That's what it's going to be like when you pass away if you don't have a proper plan. So just,
Right.
prepare for it.
That makes sense. And would you suggest, even like when you do your proper plan to further avoid issues, to actually sit down with all of the heirs before you die and tell them, like, go through it together and explain like what your wishes are, so everybody hears it like straight from their mouth, kind of thing?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes that can cause bigger problems.
Oh.
We would definitely recommend having clear communications with the family, right? And you don't have to disclose everything. Sometimes clients say, well, I don't want the kids to know everything we have. So we don't want to have that conversation, right?
Right.
But at a minimum, let them know we do have a plan and Johnny's going to be the trustee, right?
Mhm.
Or your Uncle Billy's going to be in charge or whatever, right? Like at a minimum, let them know that there is a plan, where to find your documents if something happens to you, and who should be in charge of things.
Right.
And if you want to share more than that, a lot of times this doesn't have to be a sad conversation. Like a lot of times these open up opportunities to build a legacy as a family together.
Mm.
And it can be something really beautiful. And even for young families, like it can be something that, that you plan your life around. So clear communication is really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, Glenn, to say in almost any situation that clear communication is just a key component, just to have anything run smoothly. But certainly for this, I see that being a big piece of it for sure. Now, what about people who, like you're a philanthropist, right? So you love giving back. A lot of people love giving back. How can people use their estate plan, for charitable giving in a way that's going to benefit them kind of financially in leaving a legacy?
So if you want to leave something for charitable purposes or to improve the world or whatever when you're gone, sometimes people think that they're limited to giving to a nonprofit, and whatever your opinions are on that, right? Because some people say, well, I don't like leaving it to nonprofits because only a small percentage goes to the charitable cause, right? But the reality is that you can establish your own entity that will live on after you. And you don't necessarily have to run a big nonprofit organization to do that. We've set up private foundations for people where they can put funds in, and then they can leave a legacy for the family from generation to generation, that the family can follow specific guidelines on how to make the world a better place. And so, for example, we have a family foundation. It's a non-operating foundation. We don't do our own projects. We collaborate with other nonprofits,
Okay.
but we make it something that's experienced so that our kids can internalize the giving process. So every year, last year we did something with the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Okay.
And instead of just giving money, we wanted the kids to experience part of the giving.
Oh,
So
that's fun.
yeah, so the Make-A-Wish Foundation identified one of their wish kids, and there was a wish ceremony where they get to announce what their wish is going to be, right? And so we were able to basically put that ceremony together for him, and we did it on a mini golf course. And he loved superheroes, and so we got these superhero toys, and we tied each of them up, and we put them next to one of the different holes in the course. And the idea was, like, at the beginning of the course, we had Loki, the villain, right, show up and tell him that he was in trouble because all the superheroes were captured and he was next, right? And so the kid goes and he plays the first hole, and then he saves the first superhero. And he saves the first superhero, and then one of our kids came out dressed up as that superhero and joined him on the golf course. And then they play each hole, and collectively, the all my kids and the cousins and everybody comes out, and there's this big group of kids, and then he announces his wish. And it was fun, and the kids loved it, and it's one of those memories that they're going to have. But that was, how we chose to give to the nonprofit.
Yeah, I love that idea of turning it into an experience and something that you can do with your children and really get them into the whole real lived experience of giving rather than just like, oh, yeah, we're giving to this and this is what they do. It's like they get to be part of it, which I think is such a cool, cool experience to do with your kids. Glenn, I love that idea. So, you make that part of your estate plan, right? So you've got this foundation, but foundations are also a great like tax, a way to save taxes, right? Can you touch on that a little bit?
It's one of the strongest tax deductions because, most deductions are moderate. You can, reduce your taxes by $500 a year, or by a certain, percentage, up to 10% or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Charitable deduction can offset your income by 50%.
What?
50%, right? And the reason is because the government wants to incentivize us to do certain things.
Okay.
Most of the emergency response and most of the, like crisis management that happens in our country, it's actually not funded by the government, it's funded by charities, right? So the government wants us to donate and to help, contribute to charitable efforts. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a huge deduction that you can take advantage of.
Right.
We've helped people with charitable trusts, charitable foundations, when they, for example, sold a home or a property and they had a lot of capital gains taxes, to reduce those taxes substantially. And we use some of these strategies to do it.
Wow, that is so interesting. So there are ways then to reduce those capital gains strategies, and this is one of them, it sounds like.
The last time we sat down with somebody who had a very large capital gains exposure, we were able to reduce their tax exposure by 80%
Whoa.
with a combination of strategies. It wasn't just this, right? But yeah, 80%. I mean, that's huge.
Urge. Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. And really just by putting a foundation together. And then there's, you know, anytime you're doing it, even if you're doing it for tax benefit, right? It's like a foundation is going to always have this intention of giving back and doing something good. You know, it's just being able to use money in a more positive way than just giving it, handing it over to the government, right?
Well, we had a client of ours that her passion and what she, she donates her time and on her, whenever she's able to, she's involved with community theater and
Okay.
helps, with the local high school and with different, theater clubs, and that's her passion. And then she and her husband came in for tax planning. And I said, well, what are you interested in? And she told me about that. And I said, okay, well, do you guys like traveling? Yes, we travel all the time. Okay, well, do you write off your travel? No, because it's just for, it's for family, not for business. And I said, what if you could write off your travel? Because when you travel, do you ever find ideas for costumes for the theater? Yeah, of course. Do you ever buy materials or props or yeah, of course, every time. Okay, great. We're going to set up your foundation to support local community theater. And then now every time they travel, they bring back these materials and props and different things and they get to write off their trip.
Yeah.
A lot of like lifestyle benefits that sometimes we forget about when we're thinking about charitable planning because we think it all has to go to charity. And yes,
Right.
it does go to charity, but it can also benefit, like I said, the lifestyle that you want to have as part of your charitable giving.
That makes a lot of sense. That's so smart. So, Glenn, walk us through like, you know, obviously you given the example of, you know, that huge tax, or estate plan, right? That was like $60,000. But for your average like corporate professional that might be listening today, you know, if somebody wanted to work with you to set up their own, you know, trust or estate plan, what does that look like? What is the process? How much does it cost? Can you kind of walk us through what that could be?
Yeah. On average, if you're working with a competent professional that's helping you, it's going to be somewhere between, $2,000 to $4,000. We've seen for simple revocable living trusts in like the greater LA Hollywood area, like we've seen charges as much as like $10,000 for a simple plan. But it doesn't have to be like that. Most of the time, if you're working with a competent professional, it's going to be $2,000 to $4,000.
Right.
Um, if you have a simple situation, it might get as low as 1,000, and it just depends. But most of the time, if you're getting into more complicated things where it would be more expensive, there's going to be a value to that. So it's going to actually save you money to do it rather than cost you money to do it. Because if you're spending $60,000 and it's just because you want a good plan, like it may or may not make sense, right? But
Yeah,
if it's saving you $100,000, then it probably does make sense. So most
sure.
time, if you get into really complex things, it's because it's saving you money either from liability perspective or from a tax perspective. But on average, your regular estate plan is going to be fairly simple. And then the process is you sit down, do a consultation with a professional. They're going to let you know what you need. And then if you decide to move forward, we start with a design meeting. And that means that we talk about how would you want your plan to work, who would be in what roles. We gather all the information. And then, it takes a couple weeks usually to draft all the documents and have it ready for you. Once it's all ready, we review it together, and then we have you meet with a notary to sign and notarize and finalize the documents. And then the other thing a lot of times people forget about is just because you signed your trust doesn't mean that it's done and that you're fully protected. You have
Oh,
to be sure that you put your assets in the trust.
oh, that's interesting. So what's involved with that?
So we call it funding. And most of the time for like real estate, it's retitling the assets to the trust. If you have accounts, it's just changing the beneficiary on those accounts to your trust. And it's not complicated, but it's just one of those steps that a lot of times people forget about.
Right, that makes sense because it's like the trust is here. Now you have to put everything in the trust, in the name of the trust, so that if something happens, it's activated and now the trust can do that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So it sounds like it's actually a pretty straightforward process, really. and, a small investment for somebody to make, but to avoid all kinds of challenges in the future, and just to have that peace of mind that they're set up and their kids are set up, their spouse is set up, everybody is set up for success. You can't really put a price tag on that part, right? Amazing.
Spend
So,
more, spend more on our sofas and on our cars and on all kinds of things. But our estate plan would protect all those things, along with, like you said, the things that are priceless, our family and our loved ones.
yeah, exactly. That's amazing. So, Glenn, if people want to connect with you, if they're interested in learning more or setting up their own estate plan, how can people follow you, find you, connect with you, set up a time to talk to you?
Yeah, so our website is intervivosplan.com. intervivosplan.com. And Intervivos is the name of the law firm. And then we're on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and, a lot of different places. But yeah, all of our contact information is on the website.
I love it. Just putting that in there. And I'm going to share that with everybody as well, who is watching now and who will watch afterwards, so that they've got the links to be able to connect with you. Because I think it is really, really important. And I think it's something that does get missed often. And, you don't want to set yourself up in a situation that could have been avoided, or avoid, family conflict and drama because it wasn't set up ahead of time. It just makes so much sense. And I love the financial like planning part of it too, that it's beyond just this document, but your team can actually help people really maximize their assets and maximize their, their income and taxes and all of that, because it all goes together hand in hand.
We
Um,
work very closely with financial professionals and insurance professionals. Most of our work comes through our network of financial advisors or insurance advisors. And part of the reason is because, you're best served if you have a team around you that's talking about your needs. And
yeah.
most don't get that, right? Most of us don't get a financial professional that's talking with your legal professional, that's talking with your tax professional. But that's the type of planning that we, strive to do, is to build that little community around you, so that you have your CPA, your, insurance guy, your attorney, and everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's so smart, and to have a group of people. So it sounds like your team is willing to work with others as well. So it sounds like you've got plenty of other professionals that you can suggest and refer and bring in if they don't have that person. But if they already are working with like a CPA, for example, your team will work directly with them as well, or communicate with them as needed.
Hmm. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. So Glenn, just as like a final kind of parting question, I always love to ask, like, what is the message that you really think that people need to hear right now?
That's a good a good question. Um, I think that I think in today's world, there's too many people that don't realize the impact that they have, and
Mm,
the value of your legacy, what your life means, what you're working towards. It doesn't have to end with you. Now more than ever, in our digital world, you can actually live on far past whenever you pass away. And what the message, the legacy that you leave behind when you're gone is going to be determined by how much thought and planning you put into it, and it's going to be determined by that how much you're willing to share with those that you care about, of what's meaningful to you, right? And also, sometimes we put things out into the world that we become known by, like on social media and stuff like that, that don't really represent us. So, be authentic. And if we know what kind of legacy we want to leave, and we're intentionally, pursuing that, I mean, I've just seen so many beautiful, amazing things that people can do to change the world, even after they're gone. And I think we underestimate the value of that.
I think that's so beautiful, because to me, it's all about like, how do you shine your light into the world? What is, special about you, and how do you want to share it, right? And what are you going to do to create something that can go on beyond you? I think that's such a beautiful question for everybody to ask themselves. And oh, amazing. Thank you so, so, so much for joining us today, Glenn. This has been so insightful. I'm sure everybody has got a lot of amazing takeaways out of this conversation. And for those of you who have not set up your estate plan, I encourage you to reach out to Glenn, reach out to his team, and set something up for yourself. Set yourself up for success. Create your own legacy. Think about what it is that you want to do in the world, how you want to make your mark, and how you want to protect your family, and really set yourself up for success, because that's really what this is about. So absolutely beautiful. Glenn, thank you, thank you, thank you for your time and for being here with us. I just appreciate you endlessly. And
Thank you for the invite. This was amazing, and I do think that as we think through these things, it's something that's even therapeutic.
Mhm.
But this was a great experience. Thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. I am excited for you to have your takeaways and to hear what those were. So I thank you all again and appreciate you coming. And I look forward to seeing you all again really soon. So be well, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye.